Howdy, my epic Fortnite gamers. It is your boy, Chris, back at you with another informative epic gamer video. Today, I don't wear my glasses, so I prove that I'm not reading off a script, because that would be way too smart for me to just read off a script, and also you'd just be able to see my screen through my glasses. Like, look at that. That. And I don't want that. I've gotten tired of you guys seeing my screen all the time, so you guys get to deal with this idiocy. Anyhow, what we're talking about today, stars. So, stars are a pretty important part of, existence. There are big things in the sky that provide light to solar systems across the entire world. And, we're going to talk about the life cycle of a specific type of star, specifically Biggy, Thicc stars, also known as high mass stars. So, we're going to discuss some quick things about the star. It shouldn't take us too long to get through the entire lifespan of a star. So, a star really starts out as just a bunch of gas in space, in a thing called the interstellar medium, which is just the areas in between stars, and it'll form in a nebula, which is generally formed out of an old star's supernova. But if that's not the case, then it'll form out of just sort of random gas in space. Specifically, high mass stars, they form out of really, really big nebulas. All of the hydrogen in a nebula will slowly begin to condense. It'll condense down into this sort of big spheroid shape. And after it condenses that much, it's really starting to heat up. It forms into something called a protostar, which is basically just like, it's a star, but just sort of like, it's not having fusion occur, which is where all the hydrogen comes together and forms helium. So, after it's formed into a protostar, it just keeps on condensing and condensing, and it'll finally reach a point where it forms into just a solid ball, and fusion begins. This is because it becomes so hot in the center that hydrogen can begin to form. And in the case of a protostar forming into that, it goes from being really big to just being slightly less really big, because, it's condensed some, but, it's really big. And it's also really hot when it's that large, which means that main sequence stars, which are the time when it's just a blue star, or whatever color it might be, that star doesn't last that long in the grand scheme of things. In the grand scheme of things, it lasts like 10 million years max, usually, as a main sequence star. And that's when it's just a blue star fusing hydrogen. And that's all you're allowed to fuse when you're a main sequence star. And then after it's run out of hydrogen, after it has finally died, left the main sequence, because it was so hot that it burned all of its fuel so quickly, it fused so much so quickly, it died. It began into its CNO chain. So basically, hydrogen forms into helium, right? But eventually the star is going to run out of hydrogen. And at that point, it's no longer a main sequence star. It's starting to float in between these 2 points. Just floating upwards and downwards and upwards and downwards, like that, because it's now a dying star, pretty much. It has to fuse things other than hydrogen. Helium, for example, it takes a lot less time to form into helium, and it forms from helium into carbon. Now, in real life, helium into carbon is the pretty much last legs of a smaller star. However, for a really, really big star, it now begins fusing after hydrogen, all the way up to iron. And once it reaches iron fusion, it blows up. However, and it gets progressively less and less energy from each fusion. Fusing into iron is literally the last time a star can gain energy from fusing into anything, as anything after iron literally does not do anything. That's how we got all those elements up to iron. It's from all that fusion that occurs inside the core. And at this point, it's just fluctuating, shrinking, growing, shrinking, growing, shrinking, growing at all times. as it keeps on switching between fusion types. In the final moments of a star, which is where we're at this point, the star just is about to begin fusing iron, and then less than a second later, the entire core destabilizes. There is no further point for a star, and as the core destabilizes, all the protons in the star are beginning to form into neutrons as they absorb their electrons, being formed into a massive ball of neutrons at the center, while everything else is getting shot outwards at a massive rate. It keeps it condensed for not that long before it just shatters and the entire thing blows up in a supernova. In this massive ball of heat and just mass everywhere, this is where pretty much every other element comes from, because it just forms and just goes everywhere, just explodes. And because of that massive heat that just like goes outwards and expands like hundreds of light years, that's a bit of a hyperbole, but you get where I'm coming from. Basically, that star its core destabilized and shot out all of its mass. That includes all the elements it's formed up to that point, and it goes boom. Except for a little bit at the center, which is a neutron, or which is a massive neutrons that are literally, there's practically no space in between them. They are just neutrons. And because of that formation in the center of a star, it remains. It doesn't move. It's not affected that as much by the explosion around it. And it forms a neutron star, which is a really, really small star that just sort of like exists. And it doesn't do fusion or anything, doesn't produce that much heat, but it does produce some light, and it shoots out radiation, because it is much in the way a lighthouse would, because it's a spinning beam. Of course, the intonation of such beams depends on the rate at which you follow it. Like pulsars are a specific type of neutron star, which have a very specific rate that we can track. However, all neutron stars do shoot out in a beam-like state. Overall, the life and death of a star, it starts as a nebula, and it forms into the nebulas afterwards. That's how all the planets formed as well. They came from big stars that went boom, pretty much. Anyhow, I hope you had fun. Sorry, I had to make sure that my audio was working this entire time. It'd be very unfortunate if it didn't. This was the life and death of a star, specifically a Biggy Thicc star or a high mass star. And that's everything, I think. Get out of here. I don't ever want to see you again.